welcome to Magic by Design. If you're listening for the first time, thanks so much for taking the time to press play or download. We are delighted to have you with us. What are we doing here, you ask? Well, that's a very existential question for a Monday. But Magic by Design is a podcast in which we are aiming to watch and review every Disney animated feature film. Each and every week, we break down a movie from the Disney canon in an attempt to discover the secrets behind the magic. We hit the streets of New York City this week to brush up on our street savoir faire when we watched Disney's 27th animated feature, Oliver and Company. But before we get started, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Ken, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host / brother, Garrett. Gar, how are you?
We're already up to 27.
Yep.
I guess because we started this podcast at more or less the beginning of the end of the world.
Yes.
The passage of time has been very strange during this period.
We're nearly at the halfway point. 29 is the halfway point currently.
God, and we're nearly into the 90s. We're nearly into the good films. We've suffered through all the muck.
Yeah, we're nearly at the ones we know and love.
Yeah. We had to suffer through Aristocats to get to Hercules.
Hercules is a personal favourite of mine, as you know.
What we were less than a minute and a half into the podcast. Actually, once you throw the intro on, probably a little longer. And I've already taken a shot at Aristocats, so we can tick that box this week.
Gar, it is Magic by Design tradition at this point.
Yes, it's the worst film ever made. By the way, if you hear sounds of wind or rain, we're currently in quite inclement weather, as some people, or inclement if you prefer.
It's a weird one because we're officially in winter now, but we're getting the kind of autumn storm weather.
Which is nice. So we're being battered by wind and battered by rain. So wind or rain hitting the window might come through on the microphone, so sorry about that. Again, ambient noise, production values.
Ambiance in keeping with the season.
How do you feel, Ken, about Billy Joel?
Gary, you asked me before the podcast and I was like, I like one Billy Joel song, and then I realised that one of the songs in this film I really love, so I was like, that's two. Then I remembered Piano Man, so that's three.
What's the other one? We Didn't Start the Fire?
Of course.
Okay. Does he have any other songs? He probably does.
Yeah, he does obviously have a lot of songs, but those are the only three that I actually like.
Actually like or actually no?
Actually, good point. Probably no, because I haven't listened to his back catalogue, if I'm honest.
You haven't dug into the deep discography of Billy Joel?
I have not.
There's probably like Billy Joel songs that you don't know are Billy Joel songs.
Yeah, that happens quite a lot, doesn't it?
And then you hear the song, it's like, that's Billy Joel! Especially because I wasn't born when Billy Joel was famous. You have no excuse. You were born kinda when Billy Joel was famous.
Well, right at the end of when he was most famous, I would say.
Yeah, so you have no excuse. You were born a year after actually, we're nearly into films when Ken was alive.
Yeah, I'm not sure when Little Mermaid was released, but I might have been alive when that was first in theatres.
Are we on to Little Mermaid next?
Yes.
Whoa.
No, actually, I wouldn't have been alive for that.
Probably summer, wasn't it? You might have been.
But I think it's 1988. Or is it 1989?
I thought it was 89.
I thought it was 89 as well.
Now I'll have to check this. Live Googling, which is our specialty.
We'll figure that out next week, but...
No, we're going to figure it out right now. Live Googling is our specialty.
One of your famous live Googles.
I've Googled The Little, and, apparently the first two options are Vampire, which is a 2000 comedy.
Starring Jonathan Lipnicki of Stuart Little fame.
Alright, you shouldn't know that. And then the third option was The Mermaid. 1989, December 1990 in Ireland, so there you go.
I would have been alive when it was released here.
Yes, when it was released in America. Long release, it lags between release dates, is very strange. November 17th, so yes, The Little Mermaid will be the first film released when you were alive. This film, however, a year too early.
Just 1 year too early, 1988. This is not a film that I've watched a lot over the years, Gary, I have to admit, but I am very familiar with the main characters, and it contains one of my all-time favourite Disney songs.
Also, Oliver Twist is a very famous book.
Yes, it is.
Even though this is...
Yeah, very, very, very loosely based on that.
There's a character called Oliver who's an orphan who falls in with a gang of thieves led by someone named Fagin.
No, and Dodger.
And, there's a... I didn't even put that together, jeez, because it's Artwell Doctor in the thing. But, and that's basically the extent of the connection of the plot.
More or less, yeah. But there is the part of the plot where Oliver starts to go legit, and then they're all like, hey, you can't leave the gang, and try to pull him back in. I think that's part of it as well.
We will talk about that in depth in this particular film. I have takes about Oliver.
You do?
Uh-huh.
This Oliver or Oliver in general?
This Oliver.
Okay, cool, fair.
Oliver the person, not Oliver the movie, because Oliver's in the title of the movie. I also have takes about Oliver, if we're referring to the movie.
Following the release of The Black Cauldron...
Which, again, must be reiterated, is a real film that exists and is mediocre.
Okay.
But deserves its mediocrity.
Check. That's another check off the list this week.
Actually, we haven't done Kingdom Hearts updates in a while, because I think we're in an era of films that Kingdom Hearts are just like, nah.
Nah. People don't remember these movies, let alone putting them in a famous game franchise.
Yeah, because Snow White gets decent featured, Cinderella, the famous princesses get featured, and then there's stuff like Pooh that gets in, and then basically they wait until the 90s when the films people love, and they start putting them in, because there's plenty of Hercules and Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast representation in Kingdom Hearts. But yeah, this era of films, they're just like, who likes Oliver and Company? And I wonder, is there some weird licensing thing? I've always wondered this, where it's like licensing the Disney version of Oliver and Company.
Oliver and Twist is what you were going to say.
Which licenses the Dickens novel Oliver Twist. Like, how does that work if you want to, say, put something from Oliver and Company into a different medium?
Does it need to be licensed at this point?
Does it need to be, like, double licensed? Dickens is out of copyright, so that's a bad example in this instance, because Dickens was, I think, 1824, I think, was when Oliver Twist was written. But, so, yeah, Dickens would be out of copyright. But for stuff that is in copyright, and when it's put into some other medium, does it have to be, like, double licensed?
I'd say so. Somebody has to get a kickback there.
So, like, I'd imagine actually Disney's license probably covers more than our film.
There's normally that boilerplate bit that goes like,
film.
And any other media in perpetuity for the rest of time.
Well, for the period in which we're paying for the license.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd imagine Disney's license does probably have to catch all the, like, video games or television shows or theme parks.
But an interesting note there, Gar, in Hollywood now, a lot of TV shows, for example, that are coming up on streaming don't have the original songs, because when the original agreements were drafted, they didn't take into account streaming, which didn't exist at the time. So there is a chance that the media that they mentioned in the contract wasn't exhaustive, which is why they put in that new sentence to say anything that could ever exist in the future, basically.
And, like, some of this stuff only has, like, certain length licenses. We're licensing this from you for 5 years. Like, Grand Theft Auto is a big example. Grand Theft Auto is very famous for its songs on the radio. But some of the more recent releases of the older Grand Theft Auto games have lost some of the more famous songs in those games because the licenses have expired. Or wrestling is another big example, Ken. If you go on the WWE Network and watch Maven make his entrance, you'll realize he doesn't have his theme song because it was licensed for a certain period in a certain way, and they don't have that license anymore. It's interesting. They have paid for some licenses, or some of the licenses were long to, because, like, the My Way package is still there, so that stuff still exists. But yeah, that stuff is interesting.
Yeah, I'd imagine Fred Durst is okay with receiving money for that.
They put him on one of their games. What more can he want? He became a video... Actually, he's been a lot. I think he was in Def Jam as well, so he's been in a bunch of games.
Anyway, following the release of the very real and very film Black Cauldron, Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg held a pitch meeting with the animation staff in which the story artist Pete Young pitched the idea of adapting Oliver Twist with dogs. Interestingly, Ron Clements and John Musker had pitched The Little Mermaid and Treasure Island in space. Little Mermaid would go on to be the next film released, and Treasure Planet would eventually be produced in the early 2000s.
So it is interesting that they're like, we're doing it. These are our ideas, and there's probably every time it's like, we want to do the Treasure Island in space one. It's like, no, we're doing Hercules. It's like, and then it comes around again. It's like, we want to do Treasure Island in space. No, and eventually they wear them down.
Yeah, because Hollywood are so bereft of ideas. Like, wait a second, did you say something about Treasure Island in space like 10 years ago?
Let's do it.
The pitch was quickly approved, and the film went into production under the working title Oliver and the Dodger. Oliver and Company premiered theatrically in North America in November 1988, the same day on which Disney celebrated the 60th anniversary of the Mickey Mouse short Steamboat Willie, the short that started it all, Gar.
Yes.
It was also the first film to be released as part of a brand new schedule requested by Katzenberg, in which Disney released a new animated film every year, similar to Walt Disney's intentions for animated features during the 40s.
It's very interesting that, like, you were talking about how the Black Cauldron killed animation at Disney, and you mean in the sense that they were booted off the lot and all that stuff, and it no longer became a priority. But also they were like, let's make more. Let's make them. I suppose probably let's make them faster
and cheaper.
Still, they're like, let's make more. Maybe Jeffrey Katzenberg was a genius. Maybe Quibi was ahead of its time, which was shut down. Poor Quibi.
Quibi is officially dead.
Well, like, Quibi was one of those things. Like, it's an idea that would not have worked. This was a stupid idea that had far too much money poured into it, and despite, like, the really considerable star power associated with it, it was never going to work. But the entire premise of Quibi was that there would be 10-minute vertical bite-sized pieces of content that you could watch while you commute or watch while you stand in line for a coffee, and they launched 2 weeks after the world shut down due to a global pandemic.
Yeah, like, talk about timing.
This set of circumstances that they launched into thinking that would exist have existed for the last 100 years. People have commuted to work for like 100 years longer, and people have stood around in lines waiting for things for just that amount of time. So, like, this completely unforeseeable event completely shattered their business model in a way that is, like, cosmically fascinating.
I find it very interesting because you had the .com bubble, Gar, and then you had the app bubble, and now we're seeing the streaming bubble. And everyone and anyone is getting into streaming and trying to throw money into it, even if they know nothing about it. And I think it's funny that like there's always bound to be a Quibi in there.
But like it's people are always like, oh, you're not going to be a TikTok. You never know what's going to be a TikTok until it's a TikTok.
And then they're like, of course.
And so in hindsight, of course, TikTok is a wonderful, amazing idea. Like Quibi could have taken off. Like it's not the worst conceptual. It is. It's dumb. It was never going to succeed. But it's like the idea behind it at least had some logic. That like you're on a train. You hold your phone up, you don't really want to hold it sideways, so we'll produce vertical content in short bursts for that stuff. Then the world shut down. They were completely screwed. Like, their margin of success, they had probably like a 5% chance of succeeding in the first place. And then it just plummeted to nothing the second they launched 2 weeks after a pandemic hit.
And they also didn't account for the fact that people were in the habit of watching long-form content in chunks during their commute anyway.
Also, they had a problem that they had a much more accessible, popular competitor for that space, podcasts.
Podcasts, YouTube even. People watch YouTube on the train.
Like, I think podcasts have become people's preferred commute entertainment because you just stick earphones in your ears. You don't have to watch a screen. You can just trail off into space while you sit there in your train chair waiting for the train to arrive.
And listen to it in chunks.
And you can listen to this podcast while you commute because we're very good like that. We're producing important content, Ken. We turned down the Quibi deal to produce this show.
And if you listen to this podcast in chunks during your commute, Gar, it will last you ages because everyone's commute is like 1 minute now. So this podcast will last you like 40 days.
Yes, you wake up, you get out of bed, you walk out the door, you walk in probably into unless you're in this room where I don't even have to touch the floor to commute to my desk. But some people like yourself can like the separation of like where you sleep from where you work. So you might get the 30 seconds walk down the hall to listen to our podcast.
Then it will last you 80 days.
Like there are people who are like, oh, feel sorry for the people who are out of work at Quibi, and like the people at Quibi took Quibi for a ride mostly.
Yeah,
I'm sure there are some people that got like overworked and stuff like that, which is kind of sad. But for the most part, I'd imagine everyone there knew it's like, this isn't going to last. Let's make it worth whatever it's worth.
Yeah, everyone on top is going to move to other big companies. The person who was the CEO was a big CEO elsewhere.
Like Jeffrey Katzenberg,
Yeah.
He's not going to fail.
And the other executives, I'm sure, will move on to other startups or other big companies.
And I'm fairly sure all the creators got paid for their content already. So everyone just took Quibi for a ride for a little while.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Nobody got hurt. Well, people on the bottom got hurt. But
investors got hurt mostly. I imagine people who threw billions of dollars into this utter failure. Those are the people, even then, they have billions of dollars and throw into other utter failures. And yeah, if someone left like a stable job to go to Quibi, that's a risk you knew you were taking. But I suppose those people you'd feel sorry for.
Yeah, anyway, this is not the Death of Quibi podcast, so let's move on. This film was also released on the same day as The Land Before Time, Gar. As you may remember, that's produced by Don Bluth, who broke away from the Disney studio.
Do you think they counter-programmed him?
Yeah, I think they kind of piggybacked, or at least wanted to go head-to-head. That was their strategy for a while. They wanted to be a main competitor.
No, the other way around. Do you think
Disney tried to torpedo him?
Yeah, that's like this guy thinking he can get away from us. We're going to release one of our toonies head-to-head with you, buddy.
Land Before Time pipped Oliver and Company to the top spot in the box office in the first week, but went on to make much less money.
Again, Land Before Time is a weird thing that I absolutely adored as a child, but have no actual memory of. Is the wind and the rain, dear God.
Ambience.
Yes, ambient noise. If you can hear the rain, it's gotten quite bad now. But I've watched The Land Before Time probably a dozen times and I don't remember it, which is very strange. I should rewatch it. That and Pagemaster, which I do have vague memories of. Pagemaster.
We still have the tape
of Pagemaster.
We do, and we still have a videotape player. You might hook it up,
or I could just there's the internet. But yes, I could watch the tape of Pagemaster, which I remember watching the heck out of Pagemaster as well.
Yeah, there's a bit where there's this mural on the ceiling of the library.
Yeah.
Showing like a wizard and all these like tales from different literature that melts and then chases him to like kidnap him into the cartoon book world.
It rules.
I found it terrifying. Very cool visual effects for the time, but I found that absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, I should rewatch Pagemaster. That film rule.
Yeah,
maybe it doesn't rule. I don't know.
We'll do a Pagemaster podcast.
Was there any other Pagemaster media? Or was there only the one?
Yeah, that's the only one. It had a video game, I'm pretty sure.
There was a video game. I do remember that.
Care, in terms of the animation, Oliver and Company is notable because 11 minutes of the film was made using computer-assisted imagery, such as skyscrapers, taxicabs, trains, Fagin's scooter cart, and the climactic subway chase.
Did you start talking slightly louder because the rain started hitting the window louder?
I don't know how it's coming across, Care, so I have to compensate.
I find that quite funny. It's like, I must talk walk over the rain.
Well, Gar, people pay for things like Headspace and Cam for that rain effect, so they're getting it for free here.
Yeah. Sorry, what did you say? I did have a point about... 3D effects, yes. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good.
It's the most extensive use of computer-generated imagery in a Disney film to date, and we're seeing them become more and more comfortable with the technology. But not only that, they're coming up with more creative ways to maximize its potential. It did look pretty good. It's weird because that is the standard now. We're used to seeing that.
Those very clean lines and crisp-looking animation, not the hand-drawn
and the 3D computer panning. But it's strange that this takes a bit of getting used to while watching this film, because we watched these films back to back to back. So we're used to kind of that side-scrolling. It's a 2D film. It has a 3D look using the famous multiplane camera, but it doesn't have that kind of smooth panning. And it's weird because we are used to it as consumers, but it just feels strange watching it in a Disney film, having watched all these films over the last weeks.
It almost feels in a weird way that you're watching like the artistry torn out of it. It's like, watch...
it's a bit more industrial. It becomes like a process rather than art.
Yeah, which is... And that's not really how I feel about it. I'm not like computer animation, ruined animation forever. It looks terrible. It's removed all the art out of it. But, watching them side by side, sometimes in the same scene, because there's a scene in this where they pan around like a 2D environment with like a 3D camera, and it looks very strange and jarring, and I don't like it at all. My brain is like, no.
Yeah, it's like, no, does not compute.
Do one or the other, please. But seeing the 3D kind of come into these films, and you do see like the painterly effect. You see the lines removed. Everything looks a lot cleaner, a lot more, as you said, industrial, a lot more graphical, and removes like the painterly effects, removes like the brush strokes and the kind of blurrier lines, which, if you go to the opposite extreme, the horrible blurry lines of Aristocats where everybody's melting. But then you go to the other side when you see the real crisp 3D effects here, which they're interesting to contrast the changes.
Yeah, and I think the best films going forward find a happy medium between the two. Like The Lion King is very graphical and clean and slick in its look, but it has the painterly effect as well. Yeah,
and like we're approaching the point where these films are no longer handmade. I think The Rescuers Down Under is the last one.
Little Mermaid is the last one, actually.
Oh yeah, The Rescuers Down Under is the first one that has no like
where they go all in on the digital, yeah.
And everything becomes digital. So like these are the last of the handmade animated films until 2008 Princess and the Frog. They started going back to it, didn't they?
Well, it would still be all done in computers, I imagine.
Would it?
Yeah.
I know that they were talking about how they went back to like hand-drawn 2D animation for that one. That was the big selling point of Princess and the Frog. We'll get probably into the nitty-gritty of the details of that when we get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're removing like the handmadeness of these films, which I think is kind of a shame. Like the handmadeness kind of adds there's a human touch to it that's lost. And like the fact that these things were handmade made them feel like, almost like actual physical things. There was a tangibleness to them, as opposed to like they're just zeros and ones in a computer that have been rendered and sent to your video screen. They came from actual like handmade works.
It's like paintings come to life.
That's kind of a nice thought about it, but hey, technology makes other things redundant all the time. We all move on,
and it's no less work if you think about it.
No, it's probably more work the other way. But
in terms of the human characters in this, Gar, they limited the characters they had again, but they went for a very caricature, cartoony style, so the characters could move with a bit of
ridiculousness and get away with it.
Yeah, squat and stretch and, big broad movements for the likes of Sykes. I found Jennifer a bit strange in that they tried to breach the two. She had a kind of cartoonish look, but she also looked kind of realistic, but her eyes were like blue and dead.
Yeah.
She looked kind of strange to me.
I think that like the characters, like this is animation, so things should be over the top and expressive anyway. So like you can use that as an excuse for animating characters to be over the top and not particularly realistic. And I actually think that makes animation better usually. Like super realistic animation is kind of weird looking.
Yeah.
So it's like you might as well make them caricatures and silly and over the top so that you can do the things where you don't have to like super realistically animate how they move. But also you can make them like expressive in ways that humans can't be expressive. And that makes the medium more interesting.
Yeah, because like there was a movement for a while to make animation as realistic as possible.
I hate realism.
That's not what it's supposed to be. Now, it has its moments. Like there was a Final Fantasy film made at the time, which was very revolutionary in terms of motion capture.
Humongous flop.
Yeah.
Nearly killed the company, but sure.
Yeah.
Legitimately, they merged with Enix after that because they lost so much money on the film.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that like, if I wanted that, I'd just watch a film.
Yeah.
Animation is, I wanted a form of expression and emotion that's, it's outside the realms of the real world. world. That's why I go there for.
And like the same thing happens in video games where people are like hyper-realism, hyper-realism, hyper-realism. And I always connect with like more stylized, artful games with like different, unique, interesting looking art styles. Because there's only so much you can see hyper-realism and be like, whoa, look how real it looks.
Yeah, again, like this is what I have in the real world. I go to films to escape.
I can look out my window and see the realness. I don't need to see the realness in my opinion. And like when you see a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, which is like a technical marvel, and the Final Fantasy Spirits Within is the same thing in animation, despite its gigantic failure. But I don't want that, you know? I don't want to watch animation and watch something that looks like real life. I want to watch animation to be taken to fantastical and wonderful worlds. Same thing with video games.
Yeah, worlds that can't be created in the real world. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, and eventually, like, I think I pondered this question to you when we were on a walk once, but do you think that, like, CGI or like, realistic animation will just replace, like, the kind of toony animation that we know? When CGI gets so convincing that you can create anything. You know, you can create anything and it looks realistic and there's no uncanny valley and it looks good. Will that get rid of like the more cartoonish animation we make?
I think that will become more of a niche over time for sure, and that's a shame. But then there's an argument, would it replace films altogether?
That's another interesting thing. Like, we don't need to make sets anymore. We can just make it, you know, we can do it in post. We can do everything in post.
We don't need to pay actors.
Yeah, that'll be,
well, we don't have to pay them as much. We might have to pay for their voices.
Yeah, so they'll get rid of the... Well, then they'll still have, like, mocap. I don't think they'd ever get to the point where they could... Well, they might get to the point where, I suppose, where they could animate characters without the help of actual people making faces. But that's probably a decent while down the road.
It'll probably get to a point where they can feed, like, tropes from a movie into a supercomputer and it just produces a movie, renders it in, like, half an hour.
Yeah, you can run, like, Casablanca through a machine learning device and it'll just make a remake of it.
Like, give me a rom-com with a nervous but charming lead and a hunk that's out of her league, but also they find common ground, and it's just like, here you go. You've got mail too.
Yeah, Sandra Bullock would definitely be in it.
Yeah.
Meg Ryan is in
virtual Meg Ryan.
Virtual Meg Ryan. But that's the weird thing. And we've already started dipping our toe on this of like putting dead people in films, which is the thing I'm never a fan of. It's just, no.
It feels a bit icky to me.
It always feels icky. And it's even in circumstances like Star Wars where it's just, I don't like it. I don't like that.
It still has that uncanny valley feeling, as you said, Ker.
It feels like they Frankenstein these people into these films, you know?
Yeah, it feels in bad taste to me, but can't stop progress, I guess.
Yeah, so will we have animation to talk about in years to come? Who knows?
The film is, of course, based on the classic 1838 Charles Dickens novel Oliver Twist, to be exact, in fact. The production team originally envisioned a much darker, grittier film, with the opening containing Sykes' two Dobermans murdering Oliver's parents.
Whoa.
Setting the story to focus on Oliver exacting his revenge as detailed in a draft from early 1988.
They would have went for it. They should have made that film.
Yeah, that's a very different film, though. That's like a revenge epic.
Like, this film, like, obviously Oliver is a dark book about dark themes about like child labor and homelessness and all that fun stuff and orphans. But like, this film is relatively dark. Sykes just dies. He just gets hit by a train and his car explodes. So it's like, there's not like they took all the darkness out. Yeah. They should have went all the way. Dogs murdering.
The dogs get electrocuted to death. We have organized crime, kidnapping, guns, as you said. Sykes, to date, people have died in Disney movies, but there's been an ambiguity about it, or it's not shown on screen.
Like Ratigan in what was that film?
The Great Mouse Detective.
Great Mouse Detective. It's literally written on the wall behind me. The Great Mouse Detective. Like, Ratigan fell to his doom. They didn't show him hitting the sidewalk. Yep. It was implied.
With this, there was no ambiguity. They are dead.
Yes, like Sykes got hit by a train. The car exploded. And they could have taken the way out where they just show us him jumping out of the car and falling, and the car blows up and he falls into the water below or something. They didn't do that. Car, boom, Sykes, dead. So there is darkness in this film, so it's not like they took it all out. But and cigars. What's with Disney and cigars? They love putting cigars in these films.
Yeah, the hot dog vendor, Sykes, they were all smoking cigars.
Some rats were smoking cigars at one stage.
Of course. The rats in New York are very unsophisticated compared to the ones in Britain.
Yes, but they're solving crimes.
Of course.
Masterminding schemes to overthrow queens. These are quality rats. They're just sitting around barrels smoking cigars in New York.
Yeah, with no clothes on. How uncultured.
Yeah, so this film is, like, it's probably the most mature of the Disney films so far.
It's very strange because the tone never feels dark. It feels light for the most part, and there is that kind of element of darkness, but it doesn't drag the film into a kind of a murky place. Very strange.
Cowards is what we're saying. They should have went all in.
Roy E. Disney came up with an idea that Fagin would attempt to steal a rare panda from the city zoo in order to recover his debt.
Sure.
However, the writers would have problems with the idea, probably animating a panda, or, the whole sequence probably would have been expensive. So the panda subplot was eventually dropped.
The panda subplot. Sure.
When one of the directors suggested that Fagin hold Oliver for ransom because he is a valuable rare Asian cat. That was also dropped, but the idea is the same.
Holding the cat for ransom stayed in.
Yeah.
Like, I think, on the whole, this film, as we move into the story, so Ken can stick to his rigid structure, I think there are parts of this film that work really well, most of which are parts that come from the Dickens novel, and parts of this film which I did not like as much, which is like the Oliver goes to live in a fancy house and has a jolly good time, which I thought, nah.
Well, that's part of the film as far as I remember.
Yeah.
Where he's like with the gang and he's like going out grifting and stealing. Then he meets a woman, I think, and he goes to her house and he goes straight and he has a home and he's happy, and they all try to drag him back into the crime world.
But you see, the problem is with the way it's presented in this film is that the people he meets, Dodger and company, aren't really presented as criminals. Like, they do try and rob people, but it's mostly like victims of circumstance that rob people or starve to death. Which,
yeah, and they're kind of victimless crimes. They don't really
They're dog stealing hot dogs, you know?
They don't really rob from people that don't have the means. Like, they target rich people, which, again,
Robin Hood.
We've
been taught this is good by Disney films.
Yes, they're very much for, like, taxing the rich, but, like, America is not.
Yeah, so, like, I quite enjoyed, like, his ragtag group of weirdos. And then when he's like, I want to leave you, which he learned how to love in montage, as we all do. It's like that entire sequence is just done via song montage.
Yes, of course.
I thought, like, what an ungrateful little runt. You belonged for a family your entire life, and these people have taken you in and given you a home and given you friends and people to love, and immediately you throw them under the bus. You want to go live in the fancy house with all the means. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, and then, in a typical Disney ending, he gets the best of both worlds, where he gets to live in the fancy house but still has his friends.
But still keeps his friends. And, like...
They were his real family, Gar.
Yeah, they were his real family. They accepted him for who he was, Ken. They took this homeless, know-nothing cat into a pack of dogs, no less, and accepted him for who he was, and gave him family, gave him a sense of place, gave him people to live with, and Oliver gets one sniff of wealth.
And sells them out at the first opportunity.
Yeah, one sniff of comfort, and abandons these poor dogs, leaving them alone to fend for themselves and their owner, who will be murdered in 2 days, and Oliver knows this. So Oliver's like, I am comfortable. I don't care about the rest of you.
Well, he is a kid, though. Like, so maybe
I don't care.
He doesn't have the maturity.
Oliver sucks. That's what I'm coming down. Oliver is an ungrateful, horrible cat who should accept the dog family as his real family.
I also reject the premise that at the beginning nobody wanted Oliver because
he's too cute.
He's adorable.
Look at him. Who wouldn't want this cat?
Well, when they find out his personality because he's a backstabber, they might not want him.
That's true. Maybe they were like, oh, we'll take him in, and Oliver was immediately eyeing up the family next to them. It's like, what are you looking at them for?
Or they looked into his eyes like, he looks like he's going to betray me.
Yeah.
But that's all cats then.
That's true.
But yeah. Gar, this is a very, very 80s film.
Oh, the music in particular.
Yeah. The opening in particular is the most 80s opening yet. Like something straight out of an 80s sitcom. And it's interesting because this is the only film of this 80s period, and we're going into Little Mermaid, which is based in the past, that kind of capitalizes on the zeitgeist of the time.
Even like the early intro exchanges where like you see the bustling streets of New York and people walking around with their boombox up to their head, dancing, and like even the shoes they show feel very 80s, like with Converse and stuff like that, even though they're not
and the high
branded.
tops. And
there is product placement. Maybe that was product placement. They just didn't brand it, because there is product placement in this film. There's Coke product placement and other stuff.
And Yamaha.
Yeah, so
and I think there's like they use the fact that it's set in New York in the modern day. There's a lot of signs in New York, so they kind of slipped it in there quite subtly. So I think there's a lot that we didn't even catch.
Yeah, so the which isn't a thing. I think they don't do that much in animation. I don't remember other instances of product placement in Disney animation.
No, not anything overt, but like...
As I try to think of like stuff that, like, whatchamacallit, the Wreck-It Ralph would have had different video game franchises in it, but I think that was more intended to be cameos than promoting those individual franchises.
Well, that's much later, but yeah, up to date, I don't think so. I mean, I can think of at least 3 Coke placements in this film.
Yeah, there's like an empty can that they linger on for a while. It's very strange. What was I talking about before I got into product placement? Anyway, how 80s this feels. Like, the style of that opening feels very 80s, and like the way people are dressed and the way people are even moving feels very 80s. And of course, you introduce a Billy Joel soundtrack, or one Billy Joel song, and it's like, 80s, we're here!
Yeah, it's really got a sense of place, and I very much enjoy the 80s, so I'm on board for it. One of the things, Gar, I wanted to note here was Bette Midler as Georgette, one of the best performances in the film. I know Billy Joel was good as well, but...
Yeah, Bette Midler, there's like... It's because she's playing like a pretty standard type, prissy uptight dog who's taken out of her comfort zone.
Yeah, I love her prissy bark. She doesn't know how to bark. She's so prissy. She's like bark bark.
Yes, and it like makes no attempt to do like a dog bark. It's like bark 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 bark. It's like the panic. It's great. It's wonderful. Also, there's a period moment toward the end of the film where she's calling out to Tito, whose other name is Alonzo, and she's like, Alonzo, and she goes very high pitched. It's very like the sisters from Hocus Pocus,
which is very suitable this week because yesterday we just had Halloween.
Yes, Spook Week.
Yes, indeed. I haven't watched Hocus Pocus in a long time, partially because
you're a coward who's scared.
Me. I didn't like it. Why would I pay to be scared, Gar?
Yeah, when the cat is when the man is turned into a cat, and Ken's like, I'm scared and make crunchy bone noises. Ken's scared.
Anyway, back to Georgette before...
No, I'm not letting you go. I'm just going to expose your cowardice. You can't move on.
No,
you can't just be like, I want to move on from being called a coward on a podcast that I edit and I could easily cut this moment out, but...
It's the crunchy sounds I didn't like, okay? That's okay. I was a child, alright?
Zachary Binks being torn to shreds.
It's Thackeray.
Oh, it is Thackeray, yes. They're making a sequel, though. That should be fun. I hope they have more bone noises to scare you.
Yeah, and they're not doing anything better these days. So.
Are you still scared of are you still scared of it?
I can watch it now, but as a child, I don't know why it just gave me the heebie-jeebies. I couldn't watch it. Everything in the rest of the film, even the Frankenstein monster zombie who gets his mouth sewn shut and then they open it up.
Kind of cute, though.
He's kind of cute, but that stuff, like, there's a lot of spooky moments in that film. But that bit in particular, I don't know why.
Crunching bone noises.
Yeah, that really got me. And the sadness of the fact that he was turned to a cat and his sister just got killed.
Well, killed and then eaten?
I was a sensitive kid.
I guess essence sucked, which I guess is kind of eaten.
Yeah, because, without our essence, what are we, Gar?
What is essence?
But for a while, actually, Georgette, she's a literal bitch. So
hey!
I was like, is she going to be the villain of this film? And for a period, she is, but then Sykes takes over full throttle.
Maybe she's the hero of this film, if you really think about it, Ken. Taken out of her comfort zone, she learns her. Unlike Oliver, who doesn't learn his lesson, who just gets to go back to his happy, fun time family. Georgette, at least, she learns to go out of her comfort zone. She learns to accept Oliver. She learns to help save Oliver, no less. So, Georgette, the real hero.
Redemption arc.
Yeah. Get out of Oliver should learn a thing or two. Living in her house now.
Moving on quickly here to the music. Howard Ashman wrote the song Once Upon a Time in New York City. That was part of the opening. Mm-hmm. A very musical opening
Very
song.
80s musical opening song as well. Yeah. So 80s. This film is so 80s.
Ashman would go on to partner up with Alan Menken to write songs for The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. Their partnership produced some of the most famous Disney songs of all time. This was his first contribution.
Sorry, I was popping at my own note that I wrote down. Oliver is an ungrateful piece of shit.
Garrett, this is a PG podcast. We talked about this. I'm gonna have to Mickey bleep you.
Yeah. It's worth it.
For a time, the sound mixing in this film felt a bit off again, a little bit echoey, especially when it came to the voice of the Dodger, which made me feel like Billy Joel may have recorded his lines remotely in his studio.
From like his house.
Yeah.
It did feel a tad echoey, and particularly for your favourite song, which like the recording version actually sounds fine, so I don't know what happened.
It became less noticeable as the film progressed, I guess. I think I got into the story and I stopped
Maybe it was like
noticing
a weird speaker thing. Because I know that the speaker I have here, because I bought a computer that didn't have a speaker, and I was like, whoops! So, no, I bought a computer, then I bought a monitor that didn't have a speaker, then I had to buy a speaker. So maybe it's a weird speaker thing that made it sound weird.
Could be. This is full of 80s bangers, not a dud in the bunch. Why Should I Worry is an all-time great Disney song. I love it so much. I specifically requested that song this week. Spoilers.
You're like, Nicole, do it now.
Some of the songs also have that musical theatre vibe. The opening song, the Georgette song, and also Jennifer's song. So it has that mixture of the 80s pop songs that Disney wants to kind of get recognisable artists on board to market the film, but also go back to that musical format. I think this film can pretty much be described as a musical.
They don't go all in. Like, there is like decent stretches without a song, but it is very like, and this is the character song, and this is this character's song, and this is the overall like happy, everyone is here to have fun song at the start of the film. It is. I don't think this template came from Oliver and Company. I think it existed in like Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty already, and the Jungle Book in particular, of course. But it is very much the Disney musical formula, where there's like 4 or 5 key songs.
Yeah, we even get that sweeping sentimental score that's close to what we see from a Disney movie today. Parts of the score are instrumental versions of Why Should I Worry and other notable songs. So again, that kind of style that we would see going forward.
I think that's why the score worked on me as well. Like it's a very traditional Disney animated film score. It's maybe the most traditional Disney animated film score we've seen so far.
It kind of the one that tugs on the heartstrings and like lifts the emotions.
Yeah, so I think that's there's so much rain.
So much ambience, Gar.
Yeah, I want if the listeners can't even hear it, I don't even know if it's coming true. So it's going to be very, very strange, but it is battering the windows.
One last note here, Gar. I loved the uplifting reprise of Why Should I Worry at the end, where all the characters join in, mirroring a very standard musical ending.
Yeah, we were talking. I think this is the first. I think it's the first reprise.
You get like reprises in that like characters aren't singing it at the end of the movie. They do the song and then go to the end.
Yeah.
But in terms of the characters actively performing it and it being part of the movie, I think this is the first time.
Because like Pinocchio did have the When You Wish Upon a Star reprise at the end, didn't it? I think, and I think Cinderella might have had one as well. But yeah, in terms of like character sung reprises, I think this is the first. It's not like we've watched all of these films recently. I should remember, but it's like 27 films. That's a lot of films to keep track of everything in. My brain doesn't have that much room. My brain has hardly any room.
You're a boy of very little brain.
I sure am.
Many see this film as the dawn of the Disney Renaissance, most likely due to its direct proximity to The Little Mermaid.
And love of Billy Joel music, I'd imagine.
Obviously, The Little Mermaid is the film that marks the official beginning of the Disney Renaissance that would last for the next decade. I think it's the return to the musical format that had served them so well in the past, and this format would also fuel the success of the Disney Renaissance, and then the advances in technology as well.
Yeah, like these last few films have been notable for like I think particularly the development of 3D. I think that's been the most interesting thing about them from like a historical standpoint, other than like them being pretty good movies that have good music. It's like seeing like the early development of 3D and how it looked really, really rough in The Black Cauldron, and then actually quite good in these 2 most recent films. So it actually didn't take them a particularly long time to work it out. There was just like one movie that had like hiccups, and then they're like, fair enough, they're not implementing it through the entire film yet, because that would be extraordinarily expensive at that stage. But they're implementing it in ways that are interesting and look good, even if not the same.
Well said.
Yeah, I like this film. I think this film is good, not great. As I said, I don't like the Jenny stuff. I don't think that particularly works in a particularly interesting way. And
if you cut that out, the film wouldn't be any worse for it.
Like I think there's a much more interesting film in these ragtag group of dogs desperately trying to find something to pay off Sykes. Because I think Sykes is a great villain, because like he's a very un-Disney villain. He's a mob boss who's like, I'll murder you if you don't pay me back.
And he does murder people. Like, he gets killed in the end. So like the stakes are quite high.
Yeah, so I think he's a very different Disney villain. He's not like the mustache twirling. He's not like the camp over the top. He's just like, he's a sinister mob boss. It's very grounded. It's
like real life.
Yeah, so like I think he's a good villain. So like I think a much more interesting version of this film is these ragtag group of dogs trying to find a way to pay Fagin's debts that don't involve Oliver falling in love with some rich family and getting all the pamperings of life and abandoning his friends, leaving them to die.
And a tight, contained story like that would have made the story much more compact, but also much more coherent. In a lot of ways, for me, Gard, this is a standard middle-of-the-road Disney animated film.
With a song you love.
Yeah, you do get a sense at times that you've seen all this before, especially in the likes of Lady and the Tramp or 101 Dalmatians. However, I did really appreciate the interplay between the unique characters of the gang. I enjoyed spending time with them, to your point.
Yeah,
they were all
which
unique.
is the reason I kind of hated when Oliver abandoned them.
Yeah, they're all unique. They all had personality. I know some of them are stereotypes, like Alonso, but, I still enjoyed his frenetic energy. Needless to say, I love the musical format as well. Oliver and Company is similar to The Jungle Book in that the story primarily exists to transition from one song to another, but I feel as if it was more successful here because it used the more self-contained story of Oliver as a bedrock, where The Jungle Book is a big sprawling collection of stories that was hard to adapt. As we talked about in that episode, go back and listen to it.
Yeah, The Jungle Book is not really a film with a plot. It's Mowgli goes to this character, Mowgli goes to that character, Mowgli goes to this character, Tiger, end. Whereas this film at least does have a coherent narrative that it builds the songs into, even if it takes that narrative off in directions I don't particularly like. Jenny. Get out of my film, Jenny. I care about Jenny about as much as her parents do.
That's a classic. It's not even a Disney trope. That's like an animated. It's not even an animated trope. That's like a
children's film trope.
Yeah, it's like absentee parents that don't give a crap about her, and they throw money at her, as I said, to make her feel better. And
then you have to be taken off to Neverland to learn to love your children.
We're not coming home for your birthday, sweetheart. Sorry, here's some money. But you said you'd be home for my birthday.
Ken's making his own film now. Ken would like to perform the role of Jenny in the live-action remake of Oliver and Company.
Buckle in for the next hour and a half of my audition. Overall, while it's not a classic, I agree with the consensus that this is an important movie in the Disney canon because it begins to coalesce all the things that make a successful Disney film, propelled by young animators and fresh ideas. I'll definitely be revisiting it from time to time in the future.
And Ken will be listening to the song for days on end.
Yes, I will.
How many times have you listened to it since last night?
3.
Ah, there you go.
Alright, Dodgers, sadly we've nearly come to the end of our show for another week. Our resident street smart musical correspondent Nicole is coming up in just a few moments with a song from Oliver and Company.
Wonder which one.
It's a good one this week, so be sure to stick around for that at the end of the show. You can find new episodes of Magic by Design every Monday, where all magical podcasts are downloaded. Check out our website at magicbydesign.buzzsprout.com to find a full list of podcast providers. There, you'll also find all our previous episodes if you're catching up or feel like revisiting an old favourite. Magic by Design is also on all your favourite social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Magic by Design Pod, on Twitter at Magic Design Pod, and on the Insta at Magic by Design Pod. If you liked what you've heard and want to support the show, please do consider giving us a review on your podcast platform of choice, share the podcast on your socials, or recommend the show to a fellow Disney fan. You owe us some 5-star reviews and we will be collecting in 3 days.
It's Christmas. Give us 5-star reviews for Christmas.
We will be back next week at the same time, same place with Disney's 28th animated feature, The Little Mermaid. But until then, stay safe and remember, keep your dream alive. Dreaming is still how the strong survive. Now then, Nicole is here to sing us out with What Else? Why Should I Worry? From Oliver and Company. And she's also managed to scrounge up some fun facts about the music of the film. Thanks for listening and take it away, Nicole.
Hello there, Disney lovers. It's me, your musical correspondent Nicole, coming to you live from my bedroom. This week we're diving into the street-savvy Oliver and Company. The score was composed by Jonathan Alfred Clausen Redford, his first for Disney, and was supervised by Carl Childs. Disney chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg had the idea to take on big-time singer-songwriters to contribute songs and their voices to the film. Artists like Billy Joel, Barry Manilow, Bette Midler, and Huey Lewis were all involved. A first for Disney and certainly a great marketing opportunity. As a result, the soundtrack has a very 80s pop vibe. The film also marks the start of Howard Ashman's career with Disney. He came on board and composed Once Upon a Time in New York. This week, I'm taking a look at the Billy Joel classic from this film, Why Should I Worry? Notably, a reprise of the song was recorded with the full cast but was never released. Ken requested this one, so I've channeled my inner 80s belt voice. I must admit, I did really enjoy it, so I hope you do too. Yeah. 1 minute I'm in Central Park, then I'm down on Delancey Street. From the Bowery to St. Mark's, there's a syncopated beat. Ooh, I'm streetwise, I can improvise. Saying, ooh, I'm street smart, I've got New York City hot. Why should I worry? Why should I care? I may not have a job, but I've got street savoir faire. Why should I worry? Why should I care? It's just street population, and I've got street savoir faire. The rhythm of the city, boy, once you get it down, then you can own this town. Yeah, you can wear the crown. Why should I worry? Why should I care? I may not have a dime, but I've got street savoir faire. Why They'll love me at the chest, they'll adore me at the wrist. Why should I worry? Why should I care? Even when I cross that line, I've got street savoir faire.